contributory factor for their emergence and length. In several places across the world, rising food and fuel prices have led to widespread unrest and instability. And on the African continent, where the fragilities are deep, sharp rises in food prices have often correlated with political dissatisfaction, protests, and agitations that have affected political stability. Today, as a result of the impact of the war in Ukraine, we see the disruptive influence of food insecurity in every country and on everyone. We are bound in our experience by the strong headwinds that the aggression against Ukraine has created in our socioeconomic circumstances. While we therefore welcome the recent announcement by the Russian Federation at the second Russia-Africa Summit to provide grain shipments to 6 African countries at no cost, we are concerned and deeply disappointed that the Black Sea Grain Initiative has not been renewed. A renewal of the initiative, accompanied by a resolution of challenges with the export of Russian ammonia, as well as agricultural products and fertilizers to global markets, represents a more durable way to prevent speculative spikes in global food prices and strengthen global food security while mitigating their knock-on effects. We therefore call on all parties to work constructively to ensure the renewal of the initiative. Madam President, as we reflect over the implementation of Resolution 2417 and the important contribution it has made in the past 5 years, Ghana believes that we must continue to be focused on the important task of breaking the destructive link between armed conflict and hunger by ensuring that the associated positive effects of food systems can promote peace and the supply of safe and nutritious food to civilians. In this regard, we continue to urge the international community to implement a series of emergency measures and simultaneously pursue long-term investments to break the vicious cycle of hunger and conflict. In respect of the immediate measures, Ghana urges for urgency and scaling of our actions to respond to the acute food insecurity and nutrition needs of the millions of vulnerable people in conflict situations around the world, especially in Africa, which is the hardest hit. We call on the international community and donor agencies to respond to the underfunded humanitarian response plans for African countries and to prioritize the implementation of the humanitarian response plans for countries in West Africa and the Sahel by helping to meet the $3.5 billion United States target required to tackle the increasing humanitarian needs. We also urge the strengthening of pre-positioned assets at global and regional humanitarian hubs to help interconnect food stocks quickly and effectively with the growing humanitarian needs. We encourage the deployment of strong efforts to reverse the rapid and dramatic deterioration in food security observed in conflict-affected settings and urge a unified call by the international community in demanding that parties to conflict comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and human rights law. Madam President, we emphasize the need for long-term investments, especially in countries where there is an acute alignment between food insecurity and conflict. In relation to this, I will make 3 brief additional points. First, our actions must continue to emphasize the preservation of the peace, the prevention of conflicts, and the early deployment of pacific means for the resolution of disputes before they lead to violence between states or within a state. Second, our actions must focus on building resilience in economies and food systems. Besides acknowledging the effects that the climate change has on food insecurity and conflicts, our common efforts should also support efforts for adaptation measures in developing countries and agricultural initiatives such as the African Common Position for Sustainable Food Systems, the further implementation of the African Union's Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program and its results framework, regional food security facilities such as ECOWAS's Food Security Reserve, and the effective implementation of the African Development Bank facility to boost food security, nutrition, and resilience on the African continent. Thirdly, we need to bridge the gap between needs and supplies, especially for regions that may be experiencing drought conditions and where the impact of climate change-induced situations could aggravate conflicts. In this regard, we urge support for the accelerated implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area to help avert future food supply chain disruptions on the African continent. Madam President, in concluding, Ghana welcomes the adoption of today's presidential statement and would like to underscore the need to act with urgency, at scale, and in concert to respond to the urgent food security and nutrition needs of the millions of vulnerable people around the world, whose situations have been worsened by conflict. We must also be resolved to provide immediate humanitarian assistance, build resilience of the most vulnerable, and strengthen sustainable, resilient, and inclusive food systems in line with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its Sustainable Development Goals. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. And allow me to thank you for organizing today's important debate, and I wish you and your team every success in your presidency of the Council. Let me also thank the United Kingdom for presiding over the Council over the month of July. I also thank today's briefers for their powerful and compelling testimony, analysis, and direct calls to actions. Malta welcomes the adoption of this morning's PRST for today's meeting. Today, the world is experiencing an acute, alarming rise in food insecurity. This threatens not only the lives of millions, but the societal fabric in a myriad of countries across the globe, representing a grave threat to international peace and security. Arresting this crisis will require a response commensurate to the catastrophe itself, in which over 258 million people globally will require urgent and sustained aid. From Afghanistan to Haiti and Sudan, populations are already in crisis levels of hunger, with projections from leading famine, food and agriculture and humanitarian organizations stating that peak global hunger is projected for this December. As we know, this crisis is not gender neutral. Food insecurity and gender inequality are interlinked, as women and girls often have less access and control over land, smallholder agricultural market support, and humanitarian assistance. The conflict in Sudan has severely disrupted the production of crops throughout the country, with estimates that 40% of the population, or 19 million people, are already facing alarming levels of hunger. As the conflict has disrupted farming, It has also disrupted sowing and harvesting. With limited access to seeds and fertilizers, the yield of the next season is in major doubt. Unless urgently addressed, this will compound hunger and guarantee human-induced famine in the months ahead. This situation would have catastrophic consequences for Sudan and the region, where agriculture is a principal source of income and livelihood for the majority of the population. President, just as conflict is a driver of hunger, violence can drive humanitarian operations out of areas of extreme danger. Violence often constrains access for medical and humanitarian organizations. Therefore, leading organizations to work where they can rather than where they are needed most. Today, we see instances of this in Haiti, Yemen, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burkina Faso. In civil conflict, humanitarian access can be denied by way of arbitrary and bureaucratic measures. This Council should never accept such attempts to instrumentalize international law. Neither should we accept attempts at shielding such actions from this Council's scrutiny. We urge the UN to continue detailing such access impediments in their reports to this Council and in the White Notes mandated by Security Council Resolution 2417. While coordinating with the host state on the development of such documents, the UN must always assert its operational independence. Only by doing so can we collectively act in a timely manner. Furthermore, this Council must take seriously its obligations to ensure accountability for those who have ordered, participated in the destruction, or prevented the functionality of civilian infrastructure critical for the production of food. Impunity only begets further violations. From generals to local commanders, consequences must follow from violations. To this end, we also call on the UN to work closer with warring parties, especially states, to ensure that adequate deconfliction of such infrastructure in times of armed conflict is conducted. President, Malta regrets the Russian Federation's termination of its involvement in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. This initiative had ensured the safe passage of over 32 million metric tons of food commodities from Ukrainian ports, relieving hunger in some of the hardest hit corners of the world. We urge the Russian Federation to re-engage with the good offices of the Secretary General and reconsider the dramatic impacts this action will have. In conclusion, without urgent, coordinated humanitarian and emergency agricultural intervention, our inaction could condemn millions to starvation. From painful past experiences, we have learned that efforts to avert famine are effective when the international community works together in a goal-oriented manner. Greater resourcing for climate resilience, agricultural innovation, anticipatory action programs, and crucially early agricultural interventions is now paramount to stave off the worst of the coming global hunger crisis. Alleviating acute hunger is the first step on the road to peace building. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, Mozambique congratulates Your Excellency and the U.S. government for assuming the presidency of the Security Council. We pledge to cooperate fully with you and the United States team in the Security Council. We highly commend the United States for placing the topic famine and conflict-induced global food insecurity on the agenda of the Council for 3 consecutive years. In that connection, we welcome the presidential statement just adopted this morning. We wish to pay tribute to Her Excellency Ambassador Barbara Woodward of UK and the UK team as a whole for their excellent presidency of the Security Council in the month of July. We thank the distinguished briefers for their important insights on this important topic. Madam President, end hunger, achieve food security, improve nutrition, and promote agriculture is one of the stated goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. One of the major obstacles of achieving this noble goal is the growing incidence in the world of armed conflicts, terrorism, and other related factors. They affect food security, where the fightings take place and beyond. The conflicts disrupt and destroy food systems, decrease farming populations, destroy infrastructure, reduce resilience, and increase vulnerability. According to the Global Report on Food Crisis, armed conflicts and other threats to security pushed 139 million people into acute food insecurity in 2021. This is an increase of almost 40 million people compared to the year before. In 2022, the situation has worsened further as the impacts of the armed conflicts were felt across the globe. The 2023 report suggests that conflict pushed over 117 million people into acute food insecurity in the first half of the year alone, in addition to other negative factors such as economic shocks and extreme weather conditions. We come from Africa, a region where our heads of state and governments have committed themselves to a collective policy of silencing the guns and promoting development for peace and prosperity of our nations. We are therefore aware of this vicious link between insecurity and armed conflicts. Many countries in Africa and Asia are the focus of the attention of famine reporters. These are countries where the specter of food insecurity could be dramatic if an urgent and consistent humanitarian action is not taken. We believe cooperation and understanding between states or warring parties to extend humanitarian aid and safeguard the human dignity would immensely contribute to minimizing the suffering of those populations who live the tragedy of war on a daily basis. Mozambique stands in solidarity with all populations that, in the aftermath of various conflicts, including those motivated by transnational terrorists, are forced to leave their production areas, thereby increasing the pressure for humanitarian aid. We defend the creation of conditions for access to humanitarian aid without hindrance, in full compliance with international humanitarian law. Madam President, countering prevailing gloom situation requires, among other things, an in-depth knowledge of the evolving threats and challenges we are confronted with. It also requires the ability to reach the affected segments of population, provide them with individualized and well-timed support in response to their needs, and strengthen their positive coping mechanisms. This is best done through partnership and collaboration that reinforce existing support structures and leverage the comparative advantages of the many organizations and entities present in any humanitarian crisis, taking into account the local, national, and regional realities. To achieve this end, Mozambique encourages the adoption of a humanitarian, integrated, and inclusive approach based on an intersectoral coordination at all levels between local, national, regional, and international partners. Public and private sector should be included in order to ensure sustainable food and nutritional security for needy populations with a view to creating sustainable food systems. Madam President, based on our own experience in Mozambique, we are of the view that food security at national or international level comes with peace and a normalization of people's lives. It comes with the will and strength to negotiate and settle peacefully the disputes everywhere they arise. In the meanwhile, to mitigate dire humanitarian situations, some actions must be taken, individually or collectively, by states, donors, and organizations that include: 1, strengthening the productive capacity of concerned countries by facilitating access to production technologies, including adequate funding for agriculture, livestock, and fisheries sectors in order to prevent conflicts. 2, lifting all constraints, barriers, and protection measures to the distribution chain of fertilizers and inputs. 3, encouraging strict compliance with obligations under international humanitarian law, reminding all parties to conflicts that indispensable objects for the survival of civilians are to be respected and safeguarded. 4, providing technical assistance and inclusion of groups most vulnerable to conflict in food systems value chains. These include women, youth, and individuals with disabilities. Madam President, Mozambique calls on the Security Council to do all in its power towards achieving a cessation of hostilities in all conflicts that continue to claim human lives in the world. It is our duty under the Charter to free innocent civilians from the scourge of war and from perpetual situation of hunger and famine. We urge the United Nations member states to channel all means and resources to the attainment of peace, security, and stability. These are, in our view, the solid foundations for promoting and building global food security worldwide. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I thank Ms. Galani, Mr. Miliband, and Ms. Salam for their briefings. Food issue concerns people's livelihoods and security. It is complex and sensitive. It has a wide linkage to production and supply chains and is one of the long-term and recurrent global challenges. The Security Council is highly concerned about this issue and has taken positive actions from different perspectives, including the adoption of Resolution 2417, which sets clear requirements for protecting civilians and agricultural facilities and increasing humanitarian inputs in armed conflicts. The international community should work together to promote the implementation and effectiveness of relevant Council resolutions, adhere to political settlement of disputes, and break the vicious cycle of conflict and famine. At present, the global food security situation is getting worse. The data shown in UN reports and the situation introduced by the briefers are shocking and worrying. China supports UN agencies in utilizing their professional advantages and coordinating roles by mobilizing the international community, especially developed countries, to increase humanitarian assistance and to fill the funding gap in global humanitarian response so as to alleviate the urgent needs of people in relevant countries. While addressing urgent issues, in order to thoroughly solve the food crisis, it is necessary to focus on the root causes and conduct a systematic review. The biggest victims of the food crisis are all developing countries without exception. Food insecurity is essentially the results of insufficient and unbalanced development on a global scale, and is a concrete manifestation of the development gap between the North and the South. It is closely related to the long-standing unjust and unreasonable food production and trade system and international governance system. The international community should seize the opportunity of the SDG Summit in September and the Summit for the Future next year to address both the symptoms and root causes, to improve rules and regulations and take comprehensive measures to achieve the goal of zero hunger in 2030 as scheduled. I would like to make the following points. First, firmly establish the concept of common security. The causes of food crisis are complex and is intertwined with other traditional and non-traditional security issues. Without the common security of the international community, it is difficult to have sustainable food security. We should uphold a common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security concept, stay committed to settling disputes in peaceful manners, and advocate dialogue, and respond to various challenges such as food insecurity with a spirit of unity and win-win mindset. We must firmly oppose unilateral sanctions and actions that affect international food security and global cooperation, such as decoupling and disrupting supply chain, disrupting market order, or suppressing enterprises from other countries. China urges relevant countries to immediately stop such practice that lack legal foundations and is also in contrary to fairness and justice. The Black Sea Grain Initiative and the MOU on Russia's grain and fertilizer exports have a positive impact on maintaining global food security. At present, the window of opportunity for restoring the package agreement still exists. China hopes that all relevant parties will intensify dialogue and consultation, meet each other halfway, strive to balance and solve the legitimate concerns of all parties, and restore the exports of food and fertilizers from Russia and Ukraine as soon as possible. China supports the Secretary General and relevant parties in continuing efforts to this end. Second, bridge the development gap between North and South with a faster pace. Sustainable development is the most fundamental guarantee for achieving common food security. The international community should address the issue of food insecurity in the context of sustainable development and take advantage of the stock-taking moments of 2023, such as the SDG Summit and the UN Food System Summit. Listen carefully to the voice of developing countries, strengthen North-South dialogue and coordination, gather more development resources, and build greater development synergies. We should vigorously assist developing countries in need to solve problems in areas such as agriculture, rural areas, and farmers to enhance resilience to climate change and natural disasters and increase food production and self-sufficiency. Developed countries should cancel unreasonable agricultural subsidies and adopt reasonable monetary policies, reduce the impact of imported inflation, exchange rates and fluctuations, and other factors on food security in developing countries. At the same time, it is necessary to earnestly fulfill their ODA commitments, refrain from technology lockdowns and the practice of small yards and high fence. Rather, we should accelerate the technology transfer, application, and sharing of knowledge in areas such as biology, digital, and space to create a better condition for developing countries to strengthen capacity building and achieve sustainable development. Third, improve the global food and agriculture governance system. The international grain market has long faced problems such as monopoly of pricing power by major grain merchants, structural imbalance in the production and supply chain, and high monetization of agriculture products. Certain countries has indiscriminately implemented unilateral coercive measures, causing serious difficulties in agriculture and economic development of the targeted countries. The international community should attach great importance to these persistent problems that undermine global food security and promote their solutions, and take an overall consideration in the preparation process of the SDG Summit and the Future Summit, improve global food and agriculture governance from an institutional and rules-making levels, and focusing on increasing the representation, voice, and decision-making power of developing countries. Efforts should be made to remove the restrictions of unilateral sanctions on food production and exports, combat speculative capitals and price monopoly, to build a safe, stable, efficient, open, inclusive, and mutually beneficial supply chain system, as well as a more fair and reasonable international food trade order. Madam President, actions speak louder than words. China has made contributions to maintaining global food security with proactive actions. China has proposed global development initiatives and international food security cooperation initiative, advocating for deepening practical food cooperation. We have been assisting developing countries in the form of funding, technology, and market to improve their food production, storage, and loss reduction capabilities. China has carried out agriculture cooperation with more than 140 countries and regions, promoted more than 1,000 agriculture technologies to developing countries, trained more than 14,000 professionals in hybrid rice technology for more than 80 developing countries, and we have also provided emergency food aid to countries in need. We stand ready to work with other countries to make greater contributions to global food security with deepened exchanges and cooperation. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Madam President, I congratulate you and thank the United States for convening this open debate on a very important subject. This also follows the meeting organized by the British presidency on July 17th, in which the Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs took part. And I also thank each of the briefers for their enlightening statements. The year 2022 has been a dark year for food security. And after the Russian withdrawal from the Black Sea deal, we can fear the worst for the coming months. This acute crisis affects the whole world, and it is severely hitting the most vulnerable and poorest countries. And I'd like to begin with that point. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine continues to aggravate an already very worrying situation caused through the multiplication of armed conflicts, the impact of climate change, the erosion of biodiversity, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Russia is directly responsible for the aggravation of this multifaceted conflict. Deaf to the efforts of the Secretary General and Turkey, it unilaterally and abruptly put an end to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which allowed grain to be transported to 45 countries and to vulnerable populations, including via humanitarian aid through the World Food Program. It allowed to stabilize world prices and avoid shortages. By depriving Ukrainian grain of access to world markets, by blocking navigation in the Black Sea, Russia is directly threatening world food security and the supply of the most affected countries. It also seeks to destroy Ukrainian production and export capacities, including by bombing port infrastructure and grain terminals, in complete violation of international law. Its goal is to stifle the Ukrainian agricultural system, not only in order to reduce Ukraine's income, but also to assume a dominant market position and serve its own economic interests and those of its agricultural businesses. The increase in grain prices that it intends to cause would be to its benefit, but to the detriment of all the other countries. And so, after exercising unacceptable blackmail for the renewal of the Black Sea Agreement, Russia now adds irresponsibility to cynicism in its instrumentalization of the world food crisis. Russia must immediately stop using hunger as a weapon of war. Madam President, the response to food insecurity and malnutrition is everyone's responsibility. France is fully committed to this effort and immediately took the initiative to respond to the global food crisis by launching a number of initiatives such as Farm and Harvest Rescue. We have thus mobilized more than 900 million euros for emergency food aid, agricultural resilience, and the development of agricultural systems in the most vulnerable countries, including 160 million euros for the World Food Program. This is double the amount compared to 2021. I recall that in the same period, Russia has cut its contribution to the WFP by half, while it also deprives it of Ukrainian wheat. With our European partners, we support the solidarity corridors put in place by the EU, which have made it possible to transport 41 million tons of grain products out of Ukraine since March 22. They are currently the only transport route for Ukrainian grain, and we intend to strengthen them. France will continue to take the lead in the coming months and will host the first global meeting of the School Meals Coalition in Paris in October of this year. This initiative, this coalition, sets the goal of enabling each child to benefit from at least one healthy, nutritious meal daily. This is something that represents a social safety net, but also a lever to promote school attendance. France will also host the next Nutrition for Growth Summit. Madam President, as food insecurity reaches unprecedented levels, respect for international humanitarian law is imperative to allow the delivery of aid to populations in need. France recalls that deliberately starving civilians constitutes a war crime. This crime must not go unpunished. Humanitarian assistance must be able to be delivered safely, quickly, and without hindrance to all those in need. And as the briefers recalled, access to aid is key. It is critical for countries that are at the highest risk of famine. France also calls today for the lifting of obstacles to the delivery of humanitarian assistance for the population of Nagorno-Karabakh through the Lachin corridor, as well as obstacles to movement in accordance with the order of the ICJ of this February. At a time when the humanitarian space is shrinking, France reiterates its full and complete support for humanitarian actors in the exercise of their difficult missions. France supports the draft presidential statement put forward by the United States and thanks them. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Madam President, I thank you for convening this debate. I also thank the briefers for their valuable statements. Ecuador aligns itself with the statement that is to be delivered by the delegation of Ireland on behalf of the group of friends on action on conflict and hunger that we co-chair. How hard was it for this Council to adopt Resolution 2417 in 2018 on hunger and conflict? Today,
of the Security Council this month to focus in on the rising challenge of global food insecurity. We've seen an almost perfect storm emerge in recent years, a combination of climate change, of COVID, and now particularly of conflict that is driving this food insecurity. There are now about 260 million people around the world who are acutely food insecure. And in turn, this food insecurity itself drives conflict, it drives forced migration, it stunts growth, both physical growth and economic growth. It holds countries back, it holds people back. The flip side of the coin is we're also increasingly seeing food being used as a weapon of war, for leverage, for political purposes, in conflict after conflict. So we wanted to put the focus on both of these challenges, rising food insecurity and at the same time the use of food as a weapon of war. We just have 91 countries commit in a joint communique to ending the use of food as a tool of war. That in and of itself is a powerful statement, and we urge others to join. Of course, the place where we're seeing this most immediately and most acutely is in Ukraine, where, as part of Russia's aggression, it initially blockaded Ukraine's ports, in effect blocking the export of grains to the world that Ukraine had been a key country for providing. Then, thanks to the good work of the United Nations Secretary General and Turkey, an agreement was put in place that allowed grain to flow through the Black Sea Grain Initiative. While that agreement was in force, more than 30 million tons of grain were able to get out of Ukraine and to markets around the world. Well over half of that to developing countries, and in fact 2/3 of the wheat to developing countries. It was the equivalent of 18 billion loaves of bread. A few weeks ago, Russia tore up that agreement. The result has been rising prices for countries around the world. The result has been a diminution in the access to these food products, particularly for developing countries. And as we've seen, Russia's actions since then, not only in tearing up the deal, but in intentionally targeting food silos in Ukraine, literally destroying food, as well as the means to produce it, while holding ports and sea lanes at risk to prevent countries from shipping these products out of Ukraine and to the people who need it. I think we've heard from around the world a chorus of condemnation for this action and the strong desire on the part of many, many countries that this arrangement be put back in place. And it's very simple. It's on Russia to decide whether to do so. Of course, it could end the war that it started tomorrow, and that would solve the problem definitively. But short of that, at the very least, the world is insisting that it restore the Black Sea Grain Initiative. The urgent assistance that we're providing to countries around the world, not just in the context of Ukraine, but of other serious risks of famine, has been significant. Over the last year and a half, the United States has provided an additional $14.5 billion in food assistance to countries around the world. We are the largest contributor by far to the World Food Program, 50% of its budget every single year. And today, I was able to announce another $360 million in assistance to combat food insecurity in Haiti and 11 African countries. But for all of the emergency assistance that we're providing and others are providing, it's not enough. The United Nations, and particularly the World Food Program, has determined that right now we need to address the food insecurity of well over 100 million people around the world, $25 billion. To date, only $4.5 billion of that has been pledged by various countries. We have to do better. We have to do more. We have to do it now. Finally, as important as these urgent appeals are, and as important as the work that we're doing to address immediate needs are, we also have to take a long-term perspective and make sure that we are acting on that as well. By 2050, it is estimated that the population of this planet could be as many as 10 billion people. Demand for food is likely to increase by 50% over what it is today. And yet, yields, what's actually being produced, are going down, not up. We have to, and we are, addressing this challenge. I spoke today at the Council about one of the initiatives the United States is advancing that is a vision for adapted crops and soil. And simply put, what that means is this. We know that we have the ability to produce seeds for planting that are resilient, certainly more resilient to climate change in all of its various manifestations, and are much more nutritious than some of the things being planted today. We also know that the quality of soil makes all the difference in the world, and we now have the ability to map pretty much any terrain anywhere in the world to determine the quality of its soil, where it's good, where it's bad, where we can improve it, and how we can improve it. You put those two things together, seeds and soil, and you can powerfully address the challenge of producing sustainable agricultural production capacity with better yields, more nutritious crops in a sustainable way. We are putting $100 million to that effort. Other countries are joining in, and we expect to see significantly more come forward in the weeks and months ahead. This is a powerful new way to really make a difference over the long term in making sure that we have strong agricultural capacity and production around the world, and notably in Africa. So let me stop there, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much,
Nice to see you.
Mr. Secretary. Edith Lutteroff from the Associated Press. On the Black Sea Grain Initiative, we understand that the Russians have made some indication that they might want to revive talks. They say that despite there being no sanctions, there are still issues with banking, financing, insurance, shipping, etc. What is the United States prepared to do to try and help overcome those issues if and when talks resume? And on Niger, the ECOWAS, the regional organization, gave a week for the military leaders to restore the president to power. That expires Sunday. They have threatened to use force if that doesn't happen. What is the U.S. position? Thank you.
Edith, thank you very much. First, with regard to Russia and grain, to be very clear, the sanctions imposed by us and others for Russia's aggression in Ukraine have from day one exempted its own food products. And that includes not just the food products, but the means to ship them and insure them. And in fact, just now, if you look at where Russian exports are, its exports of food exceed what they were before its aggression against Ukraine. Having said that, to the extent that there have been any problems with things like shipping and insurance, we have throughout the process of the Black Sea Grain Initiative taken steps to work through them and to address them, including, for example, writing comfort letters to banks to assure them that it was fine to process these transactions and that they wouldn't run afoul of our sanctions. So, in the event of return to the agreement, of course we'll continue to do whatever is necessary to make sure that everyone can export their food and food products freely and safely, to include Russia. We want to see that food on world markets. We want everyone to benefit from the lower prices. With regard to Niger, we strongly support the very strong leadership of ECOWAS on Niger. I don't want to get ahead of where things are, but what ECOWAS has done in terms of stating very clearly that there's an expectation for a return to the constitutional order and a continuation of the democratic process, and putting pressure on those responsible for interrupting the democratic order and constitutional order in Niger. We stand very much behind that. We will work closely with ECOWAS, with other concerned countries. I don't want to get ahead of where things are right now, but we believe that the work that ECOWAS is doing and the statements it's made are important, strong, and have our support.
Will Malden in the back.
Will.
Thank you so much. Just to clarify on Edie's question, so the U.S. has not taken a position of supporting military force by ECOWAS, by the African group within Niger. Just so I understand what you're saying, but would the U.S. provide logistical or other support to such an intervention in the country? And then on the grain issue, I wanted to ask you, barring a return to the grain initiative, are there other ways to get Ukrainian grain onto the high seas?
Okay. Thanks, Will. Again, on ECOWAS, we support what they've said. We are working closely with ECOWAS, with other with concerned countries. I don't want to get ahead of where we are now. We'll see how the coming days play out. But as I said, we believe it is vitally important that what ECOWAS has called for actually take effect, and that is the freeing of President Bazoum and a restoration of the constitutional order in Niger. And we support the efforts that ECOWAS is making, including the pressure that it's exerting in order to achieve that result. Short of returning to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, of course, we're looking at every option to maximize the export of grains from Ukraine, including by land routes, which are already in effect, potentially by sea and river routes, rail, etc. Having said that, as I see it right now, even maximizing those other routes, it will be very difficult to make up what we were doing, what Ukraine was able to do with the Black Sea Grain Initiative. In other words, the volumes, I think, will be hard to match. And even if, for example, there was an effective and safe way to move things by sea from the south, the fact that Russia is targeting the ports, targeting the production facilities, the storage facilities, the grain itself, as long as that continues, it's going to be incredibly difficult. So I think that's what we really have to be looking at, is what does Russia do? And as I said earlier in the council, it's not about what we're saying, Manny. It's quite literally what virtually everyone in that council is saying, and so many members of this body, of the United Nations. The Kenyan Foreign Ministry called what Russia did in tearing up the grain deal a stab in the back. And that is reflective of what many countries around the world feel. Russia has to address that.
Michelle Williams from Reuters.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Michelle Nichols from Reuters. A follow-up on Niger. Have any ECOWAS countries notified the US of their plans for potential military action once this deadline expires on Sunday? And on China, you've invited Foreign Minister Wang Yi to come and visit in DC. Has he formally accepted that invitation, and when might that visit take place?
Thank you. On ECOWAS, I'd really invite you to address questions to them about their planning, their timelines, etc. But as I said before, we're in close contact with them, with a number of other countries. I've also been in direct contact with President Bazoum multiple times, including as recently as yesterday. Other actors on the ground in Niger, and I just don't want to get into hypotheticals now. We're playing this out one day at a time, and we are looking for the restoration of the constitutional order in Niger. With regard to China, as you know, when I was in China, I invited the then Foreign Minister, Qin Gang, to come to the United States at a mutually convenient time. We were looking at the fall. I have, in fact, extended that invitation to Wang Yi, who is now serving as Foreign Minister. We don't have a response yet, but we just extended that invitation. And I would expect we'll have an opportunity to see each other and to continue the important conversations that I had in Beijing, that a number of my colleagues in the cabinet had, including Secretary Yellen, John Kerry. Others will be going, and we fully expect Chinese counterparts to come to the United States. As you've heard me say, I think there's an obligation that both the United States and China responsibly manage this relationship. That starts with talking, including dealing directly with our very serious differences, as well as seeing if we can find areas for cooperation that would benefit our own people and benefit many people around the world. And again, all of that starts with engaging, with talking, with being very clear and direct with one another. That's why it would be beneficial to continue these conversations, and I'll look forward one way or another to seeing the Foreign Minister. As you know, I saw him on the margins of the meetings recently in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and I would look forward to seeing him in the United States. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
The duplicity of our former Western partners was even more clear in their arrogant unwillingness to fulfill the second part of the deal, the Russia-UN memorandum on the supply of Russian food and fertilizers to world markets. And this is despite the fact that Russia's share of the global wheat market is 20%, while Ukraine's is less than 5%. This means that Russia makes a significant contribution to global food security and is a solid, responsible international supplier of agricultural products. Not to mention the exceptional role played by Russian fertilizers in global food security. It would seem that given these obvious facts, Western countries need to focus on ensuring that Russian grain and fertilizers can get to countries in need without hindrance. Yet, this is not part of our Western colleagues' plans. This was unambiguously confirmed by you the day before yesterday, Madam President. So how can we talk about any kind of desire on your country's part to address international food security issues? All that drives you is the desire to punish Russia and your pipe dreams of dealing it a strategic defeat. You do not care the slightest bit about the interests of the countries of the global south, but we do. Therefore, I repeat once again that if all the problems that have been publicly raised by us, including in this chamber, regarding the implementation of the Russia-UN memorandum are eliminated, we will be ready to once again take part in the Black Sea Initiative. Dear colleagues, Western delegations today poured forth numbers detailing the humanitarian aid rendered by them to developing countries. Whether this is enough to compensate for the damage caused by centuries of cruel colonial policies of plundering natural resources and exploiting populations is not for us to judge, but rather for those states that have suffered from it. Do Western countries help a lot or a little? It's not polite to count other people's money, but it's hard not to notice that the amount of assistance provided by the U.S. and its allies to the countries of the global south cannot be compared to what the West has spent on weapons in less than 2 years for its proxy war with Russia to the last Ukrainian. According to the most conservative estimates, this amounts to 80 billion euros, while the total amount of funds allocated to Ukraine is 165 billion euros. And this is given that OCHA requested $55.2 billion from donors for all of its humanitarian operations for 2023, and only 24.8% of this amount has been funded to date. Can you imagine how much good could be done in the world if the U.S. and its allies were as willing to spend money on development assistance as they are on sponsoring wars around the world? But now I want to draw attention to something else. Despite all of their benevolent slogans, Donor assistance from Western states is not selfless and always comes with political preconditions. A clear example of this is the situation with the cross-border humanitarian mechanism for Syria, where Western states are essentially openly blackmailing the Syrian people seeking a change of power. Another example is the threats we're hearing now from Josep Borrell, as well as the leadership of the UK, France, and the US to stop helping Niger. Did people suddenly stop starving there after the coup? It's obvious, in other words, that all of this humanitarian aid is being used by the West solely as a tool of control over states that are forced to resort to it. The needs of the population are not taken into account in this. Dear colleagues from developing countries, make no mistake, the habits and methods of former colonizers have not changed. Only the packaging has. For every dollar allegedly spent on aid, they will demand that you pay with your sovereignty and political independence. Many African states have already experienced this firsthand and don't want to put up with such an approach. And this is something that makes Mr. Borrell lose sleep in his garden. He suddenly decided today that selling grain at low prices, Russia somehow making its buyers dependent. I won't comment on the perverted logic of the head of EU diplomacy. I will simply say that the facts are not in its favor. Russia has never considered Africa, Asia, or Latin America as a space for extracting profits. Despite all of the obstacles put in place by the US and its allies, we have helped, are helping, and will continue to help those in need around the world free of charge. We have built and will continue building factories, schools, hospitals, and universities so that you can use your natural resources to create goods with added value instead of exporting raw materials, and so that your young people can stay home rather than leaving the country en masse. We understand the importance of the uninterrupted supply of food to African countries. This is important for socioeconomic development and for maintaining political stability. That is why we're particularly focused on shipments of wheat, barley, corn, and other grains to our African friends, including through the UN World Food Program. Last year, trade in agricultural products between Russia and African countries grew by 10% and amounted to $6.7 billion, whereas in the first 6 months of this year, it has increased by another record 60%. Russia exported 11.5 million tons of grain to Africa in 2022, and just in the first 6 months of this year, we have already exported nearly 10 million. And I want to stress that this has all taken place despite the illegal unilateral sanctions imposed on our exports, which seriously impede the supply of Russian food and complicate transportation, logistics, insurance, and bank payments. Moreover, as announced at the recent Russia-Africa summit, we will be able to provide Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, the Central African Republic, and Eritrea with 25 to 50,000 tons of grains free of charge in the coming months, and we will ensure the free delivery of this as well. I also recall our readiness to donate mineral fertilizers to the poorest countries in need. Of the 262,000 tons of these fertilizers that are currently blocked in European ports, only 2 shipments have been sent so far, 20,000 tons to Malawi and 34,000 to Kenya. The rest remains in the hands of European states. And this is despite the fact that we're talking about a purely humanitarian effort to which no sanctions should apply in principle. Dear colleagues, we believe that the vast majority of countries, including African ones, which are seeing an alarming trend in the area of food security, have sufficient fertile lands. That is, there is a foundation there for building food sovereignty, and it must be strengthened not through humanitarian aid, but through the implementation of projects in the area of sustainable development as a whole, the transfer of necessary technologies, fertilizers, weather-resistant seeds. We are convinced that with the use of appropriate agricultural technologies and proper organization of agricultural production, Africa will, in the future, not only be able to feed itself and ensure its own food security, but also become an exporter of various types of food. For its part, Russia is ready to share its expertise with African states and other interested developing countries in the area of agricultural production and assist in implementing cutting-edge technologies. Unlike Western neo-colonialists, we're interested in building a more equitable system of resource distribution so that developing states are not forever hooked on the needle of politically conditioned humanity, which is nothing other than primitive blackmail. This is so that they can overcome the challenges of the transitional period, form strong, sustainable, self-sufficient economies, which can help ensure social stability and the well-being of the population. In other words, this will give them complete freedom in exercising their sovereignty and making all domestic and foreign policy decisions. Russia is ready to help you with this in every possible way. Madam President, we note the work carried out by our American colleagues in advance of today's meeting to agree on a statement by the President of the Security Council on Hunger and Conflicts. Despite the fact that this document did not end up incorporating all the provisions we proposed, we considered it possible to support it in the spirit of compromise. The consequences of illegitimate unilateral restrictive measures and sanctions that have a direct negative impact on food security in the world have been left out of the document. It would have also been appropriate to recall paragraph 3 of Article 54 of the additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, according to which the prohibitions on attacking or destroying agricultural infrastructure do not apply if such infrastructure is used as sustenance for the members of the armed forces or in direct support of military action. During today's debate, the representative of Venezuela will speak on behalf of the Group of Friends of the UN Charter. We associate ourselves with this statement, which reflects in a much fuller way the approach to solving problems that are a focus of our meeting today. Madam President, in conclusion, I wish to say that because the importance of Russian food and fertilizers is so great for the socioeconomic development and food security of the countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, the choice now lies with you and your allies. Until the illegitimate obstacles artificially created by the West affecting Russian economic operators' ability to supply agricultural products are eliminated, it will hardly be possible to restore the normal functioning of supply chains and address other global food security issues. No matter you may try to shift the blame to Russia, the facts are not in your favor. So you must therefore decide what is more important for the U.S. and its allies, geopolitical considerations or the desire to help the developing world. If it's the formal, then there is no need to mislead anyone, including by initiating debates like today's and drawing up beautiful joint documents. What we need is not words, but actions. We have been and remain ready to participate in joint efforts to strengthen international food security. Are you? We have serious doubts about that. Thank you.
I thank the Russian Federation for their statement. I wish to remind all speakers to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. Flashing lights on the collars of the microphones will prompt speakers to bring their remarks to a close after 3 minutes. I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Vahi Zhavargan, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Armenia.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. I would like to express my appreciation to the United States for convening this open debate on such a pertinent topic. I thank Ms. Rina Ghalani, UN Famine Prevention and Response Coordinator, and other distinguished briefers for presenting their views on the ways to prevent and address famine by strengthening the food security in conflict situations. Starvation has been repeatedly used as a method of warfare and perpetration of genocide throughout history. But today I'm not going to recall examples from the past or assess future risks of famine in the context of the conflict. Instead, I would like to bring to the attention of the Council a situation which is happening right now, situation wherein people do not know whether today they will be able to find milk formula for their babies, loaf of bread for their children, or provide medicines to critically ill relatives. As we meet, the people of Nagorno-Karabakh face threat to their very existence resulting from the complete blockade imposed by Azerbaijan. For more than 7 months, Azerbaijan continues to block the Lachin corridor, a humanitarian lifeline connecting Nagorno-Karabakh with the outside world. This illegal and inhumane action is in blatant violation of the order of International Court of Justice of 22 February 2023, reaffirmed by July 6 order, norms of international humanitarian law, and the trilateral statement of 9 November 2020. The complete halt of any humanitarian supplies by Azerbaijan since 15 June this year has led to a critical shortage of food, medical supplies, and other essential goods, creating a full-fledged humanitarian crisis. Disruption of electricity and gas supplies has been paralyzing social and healthcare services and transportation system, depriving the besieged population of their fundamental human rights. The blockade has a particular devastating impact on the most vulnerable segments of the population. Due to the lack of essential foods and vitamins, approximately 2,000 pregnant women, around 30,000 children, 20,000 elder persons, and 9,000 persons with disabilities are struggling to survive under conditions of malnutrition, absence of basic supplies and medicines. Moreover, Azerbaijan continuously targets civilians conducting agricultural works, augmenting its manifest intent to impose starvation on the population. These warning signs have already been communicated by the ICRC, which remains the only international humanitarian mission in Nagorno-Karabakh. In its July 25 news release, the International Committee of the Red Cross expressed concern over growing humanitarian needs and emphasized that it's not currently able to bring humanitarian assistance to the civilian population through the Lachin corridor, while stressing that its humanitarian aid convoys are a lifeline for the population in the area. After 3 days of this communication, Azerbaijan arrested 68-year-old Vagiv Khachatryan, a person who was being transported by ICRC from Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia for medical treatment. The arrest of a person under ICRC protection whose transfer was preliminarily agreed with Azerbaijan is not merely a perfidious act, but well-calculated obstruction of the ICRC work in Nagorno-Karabakh. To address life-saving needs of the most vulnerable, on 26 July, the government of Armenia decided to deliver a consignment of around 360 tons of essential goods, mainly food and medical supplies, to Nagorno-Karabakh. We appealed to the peacekeeping forces of the Russian Federation to organize the delivery of the humanitarian assistance to those in need, which was established practice through past months. However, up until now, the humanitarian cargo remains at the entrance to the Lachin corridor due to the obstruction and denial by Azerbaijani side of its transfer. Madam President, the dire humanitarian situation on the ground and risks of evolving hunger in Nagorno-Karabakh require efficient and timely response by the international community to ensure full and unconditional implementation of the ICJ decisions and full respect of international human rights and international humanitarian law. We hope that yesterday's statement of the UN Secretary General, wherein he expressed deep concern on humanitarian situation and emphasized the need of implementation of ICJ orders for ensuring unimpeded movement of persons, vehicles, and cargo along Lachin corridor, will be the first step towards full UN engagement on the ground. This engagement is as needed as ever. The cost of inaction is too high to be sustained, and this mass atrocity being perpetrated through starvation should and can be prevented and stopped. We call on the UN and its Security Council to undertake urgent measures to ensure full adherence of Azerbaijan to its legally binding obligations under ICJ orders and the international humanitarian law, immediately restore the freedom of movement across the Lachin corridor, and allow safe and unimpeded humanitarian access of the UN agencies and the ICRC to Nagorno-Karabakh. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Gevorgian for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Geraldo Penalver Porto, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba.
Madam President, we align ourselves with this statement that is to be delivered by the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on behalf of the group of Friends in Defense of the Charter of the United Nations. At the World Summit on Food that was held in 1996, the historic leader of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Castro Ruz, denounced the root causes of inequalities and hunger when he said as follows: "It is capitalism, neoliberalism, the laws of unbridled market, external debt, underdevelopment, unequal exchange that kill so many people around the world. A profoundly unjust, anti-democratic and exclusionary order persists. It has provoked an exponential growth in hunger, poverty and food insecurity. The current multidimensional global crisis has contributed to increasing the gaps between the North, that is increasingly wealthy, and the South, that is increasingly poor and marginalized. There is a proliferation of protectionist policies and speculative practices of big capital that have sent food prices soaring. The irrational patterns of capitalist production and consumption continue destroying the ecological balance of the planet. Trillions of dollars are invested and wasted in military spending instead of being used to protect life and contribute to sustainable development. Against this complex backdrop, there have been also increases in unilateral coercive measures and illegal blockades, such as the one exercised against Cuba. The government of the US has converted this recurrent criminal punishment against millions of people into a flagship of its foreign policy by means of measures aimed at strangling the economy of many countries with a view to obtaining political advantage. The main obstacle to food security of the Cuban people is the economic, commercial and financial blockade that has been imposed for more than 60 years by the government of the United States of our country in the arbitrary list of states that purportedly sponsor terrorism. This cruel policy has a staggering impact on all sectors of life in our country and derails economic development, social development, as well as the implementation of Agenda 2030. The embargo is a grave, flagrant and systematic violation of the human rights of the Cuban people, including the rights to food and development. The Security Council, with its limited composition, is scarcely a representation of the entire international community and should adjust its mandate and stop interfering in areas outside of its remit. The General Assembly is the body that is called on to lead international efforts to achieve the goals set out under SDG 2, ending hunger, achieving food security and improved nutrition, and promoting sustainable agriculture. We must bring about a fair, democratic and equitable international order that allows us to unearth the root causes of poverty and hunger and promote development, sustainable development for all people, eliminating potential causes of conflict that affect international security. We need international cooperation, solidarity, multilateralism to guarantee full realization of all of these rights to food and to development. Cuba will continue firmly developing these goals together with the countries of the Global South. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Porto for his statement. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Wojciech Żerwel, Undersecretary of State of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland.
Madam President, Excellencies, I wish to thank the United States for convening this important and timely debate. Poland aligns itself with the statement to be delivered by the European Union. We believe that the strong focus on famine and conflict-induced global food insecurity is now of crucial importance. Hunger should not be a weapon of war. Global food supply chains cannot be taken hostage by aggressors in order to achieve their military goals. as stated in the recent UN Interagency Report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world, global hunger is still far above pre-pandemic levels. In this context, let me first address two questions posed in the excellent concept paper presented by the United States prior to this debate, namely the importance of anticipatory action and the role of investments to tackle the root causes of food insecurity. International community should focus on building resilience of local food systems. Countries that can increase their own food production and build their own distribution systems are less vulnerable to conflict and climate-induced insecurity that ultimately result in famine. Public-private partnerships should be mobilized to building reliable transport and storage infrastructure. Such actions are undertaken through the Global Gateway Strategy of the European Union, or the 3Cs initiative of 12 Central European nations. Poland built on these examples when initiating the UN General Assembly resolution emphasizing the critical role of resilient infrastructure in safeguarding the delivery of essential goods and services. Madam President, even if we cannot prevent all new conflicts or stop the existing ones, we can start to counter the food insecurity crisis right now. It is worth considering the International Monetary Fund recommendations. First, rapidly and adequately support people vulnerable to food insecurity through humanitarian assistance from the World Food Programme and other programs alongside effective domestic fiscal measures. Second, maintain open trade, including within regions, to allow food to flow from surplus areas to those in need. Third, increase food production and improve distribution, increasing trade financing and reinforcing supply chains. Fourth, invest in climate-resilient agriculture. Excellencies, 18 months after the launch of Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine, there is no doubt that food again has become a weapon. Deliberately creating a food crisis, Russia shows disregard to the UN Security Council Resolution 2417, which condemns the starving of civilians as a method of warfare. We denounce Moscow's decision to withdraw from the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which played a stabilizing role for global food security. We consider this move as a manifestation of economic aggression against the countries of the global south, political hypocrisy and cynicism. Recent escalation of Russian attacks on Ukrainian ports and mining sea corridors used for grain transport constitutes yet another proof of the Russian determination to prolong its war of aggression at any cost, including to the detriment of people who are most vulnerable to hunger and malnutrition. Madam President, Poland is ready not only to undertake emergency actions, but also to facilitate capacity building of more resilient production systems. In 2022, we supported the World Food Programme to ease the food security crisis in African countries. We have engaged in food solidarity initiatives. Besides the EU solidarity lanes and the Black Sea Grain Initiative, we supported the humanitarian program Grain from Ukraine and have declared to finance shipments of grain worth 20 million euro. In closing, let me emphasize that for Poland, protection of civilians and promoting compliance with international humanitarian law are long-standing priorities. We remain committed to contribute to actions aimed at protection of civilians in armed conflict and tackling global food security crisis. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Javel for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Oh, thank you, Madame President. First of all, I congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month, and I wish you all success in this endeavor. I congratulate also our colleague from UK and her team for the excellent work done last month. Today's topic is crucial as we are facing a rise in acute food insecurity worldwide. Different UN reports outline that millions face starvation, while necessary humanitarian assistance is lacking. As mentioned recently by the Secretary General, if current trend continue by 2030, nearly 670 million will suffer hunger. Moreover, the situation differs from one region to another. Africa is by far the most fragile region. Many of its inhabitants suffer from food insecurity, particularly in the Sahel and the Horn of Africa. A sad reality, especially that the African continent can become the bread basket of the world with more investment and technology transfer. The UN system, but also the financial institutions, should catalyze global efforts and address the root causes to reverse this situation, namely underdevelopment, climate change. Madam President, we concur with the concept note that the challenge of addressing food insecurity requires resilient food systems. Furthermore, to prevent the most severe form of hunger and ensure the food security of all, it is paramount to, first, adopt a holistic and integrated approach that involves all relevant stakeholders. Such an approach will build strong and resilient food systems. It is the cornerstone to ensure food security. Second, accelerate transfer of technology and capacity building of developing countries to produce their food. Achieving food security is a precondition of lasting peace and stability. Third, fulfill engagement under international agreement, in particular, those related to climate financing. This will allow vulnerable countries facing the adverse effect of climate change on their food system. Fourth, mobilize sustainable financing for agriculture in developing countries, in particular African countries. International financial institutions should adopt and implement solutions to support developing countries, including by concessional finance and grant. Fifth, fully respect international humanitarian law and implement Security Council resolution, in particular, Resolution 2417. It is key to facilitate access to humanitarian assistance in line with Resolution 46-182. It will reduce food insecurity and prevent famine in the context of humanitarian crisis. Algeria has spared no effort in providing assistance to its neighbor, in the Sahel especially, while they were facing conflict, consequences, and natural disaster. Madam President, achieving sustainable development, especially SDG 2, is the only way to break the link between conflict and food insecurity. Therefore, we urge the Security Council to work closely with the General Assembly and the ECOSOC to promote development solutions that leaves no one behind in access to safe food. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Algeria for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to congratulate the United States of America for assuming the position of President of the Security Council for the month of August 2023. I would also like to express our appreciation to the initiative of the U.S. To hold today's high-level open debate. Egypt is fully cognizant of the severe impacts that hunger and failure to achieve food security pose on human livelihood, as well as contribute to increase the risk of conflict, especially in countries that suffer from economic vulnerability. Hence, we stress the strong and deep linkage between food security, hunger, and conflict. Mr. President, the world is currently witnessing an unprecedented food insecurity crisis that is a result of our failure to achieve a Sustainable Development Goal 2, to end hunger. This was exacerbated by the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic as well as conflicts. Failure to achieve food security and end hunger will pose a threat to security and stability of countries and will further fuel ongoing conflicts. The challenges of achieving food security are further deepened by other factors, such as the ongoing impacts of climate that exacerbate risks related to energy production, food security, availability of water, and economic development. Water scarcity in several regions in the world, especially in Africa, have severe manifestations on the activities of agriculture and the efforts to achieve food security. In light of the above, we would like to highlight the following points. 1. The importance of addressing the challenges facing countries affected by and emerging from conflict. Special attention must be paid to food security, providing health care to the civilian population based on the principles of international humanitarian law and in accordance with national sovereignty. Also, it is important to ensure access of food aid to the civilian population in conflict areas and protecting them from the risk of famine, including in this regard the provision of food for people forcibly displaced. 2. Egypt reaffirms that sustainable solutions to current global conflicts necessitate the promotion of the peaceful settlement of disputes, ensuring that all efforts are taken into account the need to preserve the sovereignty and territorial integrity of states, in addition to addressing the root causes of armed conflict, which includes promoting sustainable development. 3. I would like to highlight that Egypt is the most densely populated water-scarce country in the world. Currently, water scarcity affects 2.5 billion people around the globe, and it is expected that climate change will result in putting half of the world population under severe water stress by 2050. Moreover, water scarcity could displace 700 million people by 2030. These figures are a clear proof of the negative impact of water scarcity on peace and security, achieving sustainable development and fulfilling human rights. In this context, we urge the international community to address the needs of the most vulnerable water-scarce countries and promote transboundary cooperation in accordance with the applicable international law. 4th, food security and conflict must be addressed in a holistic and comprehensive approach that takes into consideration the humanitarian and developmental factors. Immediate action must be taken to alleviate hunger while also implementing plans to assist developing countries, especially net food importing developing countries, in achieving food security through sustainable agriculture. In this regard, I would like to recall the Egyptian initiative to utilize Egypt's geographic location to establish a logistics center for grains to address the challenges facing the global food supply chains, especially in developing countries. Mr. President, in conclusion, we would like to stress the urgency to address the challenges of food security and its linkage to conflicts in a comprehensive approach that aims at its core to achieve sustainable development of developing countries while ensuring their stability and prosperity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. President. Liechtenstein welcomes this open debate on conflict and food security as hunger reaches new and concerning levels. Conflict is a primary driver of food insecurity in 7 of the 8 cases designated as hotspots with catastrophic conditions by the World Food Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization. It has a devastating impact on every part of a food system, from planting to distribution. Often, it exacerbates already dangerous conditions for food insecurity. At the same time, food insecurity is itself a driver of further violence in regions like the Sahel, renewing the cycle of conflict and hunger. We therefore must take on a holistic approach that addresses the catastrophe of hunger both as a cause and consequence of conflict. Mr. President, if hunger as such is an affront to human dignity, the weaponizing of food is an outrage, and it is a criminal act. The intentional starvation of civilians is a war crime in international and non-international armed conflicts, as reflected in the Rome Statute of the ICC. We encourage all states to join us in ratifying the amendments to the Rome Statute presented by Switzerland that deal with the inclusion of starvation of civilians in internal armed conflict. In addition, Liechtenstein calls on conflict parties to adhere to their obligation under international law, as well as relevant Security Council resolution, notably 2417 and 2573. Mr. President, in Ethiopia, armed conflict along with the devastating drought has driven more than 20 million people into food insecurity, a crisis which has persisted even after last year's ceasefire agreement. The conflict in Sudan, where reportedly over 40% of the population is experiencing hunger, also threatens to have knock-on effects in Ethiopia and throughout the region. The humanitarian crisis in Yemen remains considerable, and we condemn the recent killing of the head of the World Food Programme Office in Yemen, as well as of its workers in Sudan earlier this year. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine exemplifies the outside impact that conflict can have on food security, both domestically and abroad. Throughout the country, farms have been mined, water systems destroyed, and grain storage sites explicitly targeted in attacks. By withdrawing from the Black Sea Grain Initiative in mid-July, Russia once again acted in direct opposition to the security of millions of people worldwide. We also deplore the Russian veto blocking cross-border humanitarian aid to Syria last month. Mr. President, the challenges the world faces today, climate disaster, conflict, displacement, and food insecurity, are deeply interconnected. We encourage the international community, and particularly member states of the Council, to address these interlinkages through the perspective of human security, which acknowledges that peace and security is about people, their survival, livelihood, and dignity. We can begin by responding to the immediate needs of food insecure people around the world, including through increased funding for the World Food Programme and humanitarian organizations, and urging parties to armed conflict to protect food systems and infrastructure and refrain from turning access to food into a weapon of war. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Liechtenstein for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Thank you. Mr. President, Resolution 2417 of this Council has been a real landmark decision. In 2018, all of its members have condemned starving of civilians as a means of warfare. 5 years later, a permanent member of the Security Council is using food as a weapon. Russia has unilaterally withdrawn from the Black Sea Grain Initiative and is destroying grain warehouses and port infrastructure in Ukraine with missiles. The Kremlin is doing so in order to recklessly fill its war chest. As a consequence, global food prices are rising and access to food is getting much harder for millions in need worldwide. Germany urges Russia to immediately stop these attacks, to stop blocking Ukrainian ports, and to rejoin the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We strongly support the UN's and Turkey's efforts to reinvigorate this initiative. Ultimately, Germany calls on Russia to immediately withdraw all its troops and military equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine in its international recognized borders. This will not only allow for grain exports to resume, but will return peace to Ukraine. Mr. President, Germany is strongly committed to combating global food insecurity and malnutrition. Food security and nutrition was high on our agenda as G7 presidency in 2022. Germany is the second largest donor to the WFP with a contribution of €1 billion in 2022. We support farmers and countries worldwide to produce their own food, and we will continue our efforts to export agricultural goods from Ukraine through the EU solidarity lanes and other alternative routes. Our joint efforts towards sustainable solutions need to be comprehensive and creative. Allow me to touch upon a few specific issues. First, climate change. The global community needs to drastically lower its emissions to fight the climate crisis and its negative repercussions on food security and malnutrition in many parts of the world. This is part of the nexus between climate change and peace and security, and we believe that the Security Council should discuss the issues systematically and on a regular basis. Second, we also believe that the Peace Building Commission can play a more systematic role in addressing these interconnected issues. It could, for example, give advice to the Security Council on country-specific situations where armed conflict and climate change exacerbate food insecurity. Lastly, we need to be creative and specific and find tailored solutions. One example, locally produced green nitrogen fertilizer has a lot of potential to support food security. It can increase resilience to price volatility and supply chain disruptions, while also contributing to reducing carbon emissions from the agricultural sector. We hope to develop this technology in innovative partnerships that enable more green growth. Mr. President, conflicts are among the main contributors to man-made global food insecurity, locally but also globally. Security Council Resolution 2417 is crystal clear in its obligations for all member states. We call upon all member states to respect them and start by stopping using food as a weapon of war. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Germany for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, President. Mexico thanks the United States for convening this open debate. We hope that it will allow us to identify specific actions that can strengthen the systems for food security around the world and prevent future famines. We are also grateful for the briefings that we have heard this morning. Joint and coordinated work by the agencies of the United Nations is essential for addressing and effectively mitigating the growing impacts of the food security crisis. For this reason, we feel that the decision by the Secretary General to appoint Madam Helani as the coordinator to prevent and address in a timely manner any risk of famine is a positive one. The early warning mechanisms are fundamental to avoiding humanitarian catastrophes. However, even more important is a timely and efficacious response. President, it is unacceptable that in a world of abundance, there is a constant increase in the number of people living in food insecurity. In May, we stated at this council that there were 193 million people in a situation of food insecurity. Now, there are already 258 million people affected by this. This is truly a tragedy. An increase of such magnitude in the space of just 1 year should be alarming to each and every one of us. While the causes of food insecurity are multidimensional, armed conflicts constitute a decisive factor in exacerbating these. Some specific cases represent particularly critical conditions such as Burkina Faso, Haiti, Mali, Sudan, Afghanistan, Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan. All of these cases demonstrate that when a conflict is prolonged, it almost inevitably leads to food insecurity. In our region, the gravest case is unfortunately Haiti. Half of its population, 4.9 million people, need food assistance. In Haiti, a series of diverse but interlinked causes have led to this deplorable situation. Economic recession, natural disasters, the harmful impacts of climate change, and a fall in agricultural production that has been exacerbated by the increase of armed violence and the lack of sustained investment. All of these have led the country to a situation of grave food emergency. President, it is imperative that we recognize that the food systems of the world as a whole are interdependent. An armed conflict can alter the food system as a whole. Mexico hopes that it will soon be possible to reactivate the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which had a positive impact on food prices and thus reduced food insecurity in the poorest countries. By way of conclusion, Mexico once again calls on all parties to conflicts to fully abide by the provisions of Resolution 2417 of this Council and to abstain from any action that can affect the production and distribution of food or attacking objects that are indispensable for the survival of the civilian population. And let us not forget, of course, that famine or starvation as a tactic of war is an international crime and cannot go unpunished. I thank you.
Of Mexico for his statement. Colleagues, there are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.
Tem as pradarias de ervas marinhas e as espécies, que existem espécies e que é preciso cuidar, é preciso preservar. E hoje, através da Ocean Alive, consigo fazer para o mundo.
We are now at the UN Decade of Restoration and also ocean science, and the work we're doing here is linking community and restoration with science and advocacy. So it's really an opportunity for us to have such an international background and to be part of all this network of people everywhere that are going on this way.